here. So I'll just bum my gums until we get some people in here and talk about my alert video or our alert video. Bruce and I combined project.
No. This is yours when it crashes and burns because everything's gone.
Damn, Bruce, the bus driver.
I know people are sick of us talking about this because we've been talking about this for like a month. Like we've been working on it and sprinkling it in there. Like, hey, we're working on this. But yeah, I can confirm 100%. It is 100% filmed, and it is literally just little tedious putting in pictures to back up what we filmed and are talking about. So
the editing is always the hard part.
Oh yeah. I will tell you this.
The physical work, we'll get out there and sweat and kid up, but it's the editing that's beat down.
Yeah. I will tell you guys this. The intro video is 100% done. Wow. And that in and of itself could be its own video. But that's not.
I've seen it. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. It might be out there on an unlisted link.
What's the topic tonight?
All right. So we got 34 in here. Before I start discussing the topic, I am going to say we are expecting one more, and that's going to be Hollywood. And we're bringing Hollywood in here because he's kind of a technology nerd, and he's very big into thermals and UAVs and stuff like that, drones, which is going to tie in to our first topic. So topic number 1 tonight is going to be, are human infantry obsolete? And the reason we are discussing this because there's a whole host of technology out there by means of UAVs, robotic stuff, thermal capabilities. So we're going to kick around the topic, are human infantry obsolete, or at a very minimum on the verge of being obsolete? So that's what we're going to talk about. So who wants to pick this one up and run with it?
Go, Doc.
Because I think here's what I suspect, and you guys, if I'm wrong, I'll switch sides because I'm a coward and I do conform to peer pressure. But I'll start off by playing devil's advocate and say, and if I need to keep playing devil's advocate, I will, because I think, particularly as a former infantryman, and several of us in the room are, that I have a hard time believing that since the infantry mission will never go away, it won't. If you're on a bombing campaign and that's all you're going to do, fine, that has happened. Look at Libya in 1987. You know, we just wanted to bomb. It was a bombing raid, and that's all we ever did, never put boots on the ground. But since the infantry mission will never go away, I think it's, hey, what's up? I think it's fair to say that infantry won't go away. Now, let me finish that thought, because I think if you'd asked this question 20 years ago, no pilot would have imagined that their job, no fighter pilot would imagine that their job was soon going to be replaced. If you said this in 2000, now it's 2021. You say this now, and while fighter pilots are still there, it's now a very real, like, people are thinking, oh my gosh, am I the last generation of fighter pilots? Will drones and UAVs take this over, and they'll all be, the pilots will sit, 2,000 miles away in a safe, bunker and fly it more effectively than I could as a human being, because they're not limited to G space, gravitational pull and all this stuff. So you have to look at that and say, okay, 20, 30, 40 years, no pilot would have they would have laughed at it, said, oh, I see Battlestar Galactica, ain't going to happen. And today, that's a whole different thing. So I have to say, there is a time when human infantry will be obsolete. It has to happen. And it has to happen through robotics and everything else. Now, right away, I'm going to say, oh, okay, so you got robots, you got cyborgs, you got androids. Are we anywhere close to that? No, you can ask the sex industry. And the sex industry, by the way, and I'm not making a joke at all, not even a little bit of an exaggeration, they'll be ahead of this curve by a full 20-year generation. They will have sex robots up and running and believable and human interaction. And the sex robots will not only be very articulate, like physically articulate, but they'll be able to convince you of intimacy better than, a $1,200 hooker. They'll actually convince you. So when the sex industry gets cyborgs of that magnitude, then it is about 20 years after that you're going to start seeing robot infantry, and they're going to be controlled by C2, C4 command and control sort of stuff, right? They're going to be controlled 2,000 miles away by guys in bunkers.
Well, I've never had the financial stability to afford a $1,200 hooker, but I have had a few $80 hookers, and I've got to say, maybe I'm a little bit cynical here, but I imagine, short of us being, on a live stream here, that you can go back thousands of years and these same discussions were made probably about the time that the trebuchet came out, probably a few guys sitting around a campfire going, well, maybe that's the end of infantry. And then you had cannon and then tanks. And, you've got other modern, what we think of as modern devices like night vision and infrared that the Germans had in World War II, both on tanks and on small arms. And here we are, 75 years later, and we're just getting to the point that it's really honestly reliable and fieldable for the individual. So I call me cynical. I just really don't see, maybe because I can only judge it based on the life that I've lived, but I don't see the end of infantry, warm bodies on the ground, completing missions, at least limited missions, for way until after I'm long and gone, and way into the future, probably hundreds of years. And I don't believe it'll ever go away. Yes, you can conduct air campaigns and you can conduct surveillance, and there's a lot you can do without putting boots on the ground. But there's some things you just have to go in there and drag that man out of the cave.
Yeah, I agree, Bruce. The old saying is artillery kills, tanks conquer, and infantry occupies. A machine can't occupy. A machine can't interact with the public. A machine can't give presents. It can't go into a store and talk to a shop owner. It can't buy a trinket or a souvenir. So the things that a human can do, and a machine can't gauge feeling, where a machine's never going to go, hey, that guy's not acting quite right. Something up about him. It's not going to be, or notice the fact that the people walking on the sidewalk are acting very different today. Machine's never going to have that ability, no matter how good we make the AI. So there's always going to be a need for some form of infantry. Maybe it's Iron Man suits. Maybe it's mobile infantry like in Starship Troopers. Maybe it's stormtroopers, but there'll always be a need for infantry.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you guys. And if we look at, the Army is always at the forefront of developing the new latest and greatest technology and whatnot. And from what I've seen, look at what they're developing. They're developing exoskeleton suits to be able to carry more weight. They're developing, helmets to provide more like HUD capabilities for the individual infantrymen. Like, as far as I can tell, there's nothing forecasted to completely replace troops. And to speak to what Les just said, I mean, you aren't taking ground until boots are on the ground and occupying that objective.
Yeah, and a great example of that was the war in Kosovo in 1999. The Air Force dominated the air and ruled the roost almost instantly. But until NATO ground forces got there and started putting bayonets in Serbs' faces, that's when the genocide of the Kosovar Albanians ended. Didn't matter how many bombs and how accurately they were dropped. It was a guy with a bayonet saying no is what stopped it.
There's other considerations to think about too, right along those lines, Les, like Vietnam. We had the capability. We could have just dropped A-bombs on North Vietnam till it was separated from South Vietnam by a new sea, but we wouldn't do it. We didn't have the fortitude to do it because we were afraid that it may bring other factors in. So what did we do? We kept it on a conventional bombing. We bombed the holy hell out of them. We dropped multiple times more ordnance on North Vietnam than we did in all of World War II. Didn't matter. We put boots on the ground, and that's where the war was really fought. That's what That's what won or lost the war for us and for them, was our losses on the ground, not our air power and not our ability to use the weapons that we had that would have won a war within a day. We were afraid to use them and we wouldn't go there. And that's a pretty common theme ever since Vietnam, where we limited our military to not using those really great tools that they had that would end wars within days. And we fought the war that their grandfathers had fought and their grandfathers had fought.
You're muted. Doc, you're muted.
So I meant to be.
We know you were talking about the sex robots again, so
Disturbing.
You can read my lips. Yes, I was.
Hey, speaking of sex robots, can you hear me?
I
can. Yes, I can. I'm smoking a cigarette over here. No. What I was saying was that, Bruce, I appreciate the argument you put forward, but I'm afraid it partially argues my point. And that is this, that I recognize you're right. When we put infantry on the ground and took ground, America, and we were victorious and we used our combat power as it was supposed to be for a war of aggression, a war of entry. I'm talking about the Gulf War of 1991. America stood up and applauded. But for all of the others, I mean, we have as we've discussed in past shows, we have a blueprint of defeating America. It starts with Vietnam. I swear that's not me this time. It's the sex robots calling.
The sex robots calling.
And so we have this in Vietnam. It goes to, to Beirut, to Lebanon in the early 80s. It goes to Somalia. And then, unfortunately, continues on from there. And that is that if you kill enough ground troops, American ground troops, America will eventually lose its stomach, and they will vote for a presidential administration that is cowardly and weak. And that administration will turn its tail and run from the commitments made to all of our allies. Now, this is a proven method that undermines the weaknesses of democracy. So let me now ask, let's go back and play a what if game. We have cyborgs in 1966, credible military cyborgs. How many ground troops are lost? Answer, 1% of what we actually lost. How many Americans are upset? Where's the hippie movement? Where are they? Oh, I won't go. Hell no, we won't go. You can't draft me. Draft you? We don't even want you. We've got cyborgs to go impose our will in Southeast Asia. The rest of you can piss off. You see what I'm saying? If you are not putting American boys and girls at risk, who's going to object to one imperial war after another? This really serves all of America's corporate interests brilliantly.
That's basically the French Foreign Legion policy. France's thing with having a legion is no one cares if non-Frenchmen die.
I'm not so.
Yeah, they don't have families back in Paris.
I'm not. That's good. These are interesting points. I do think about, though, that our government is still, in theory, subservient to the will of the people in this country. And as you're saying, Doc, maybe they won't rise up if they don't see American bodies coming home. But I'm kind of curious, thinking back to Vietnam, how much of that hippie revolution was based on dead American soldiers coming back home, and how much of it was just a general movement against the war that was somewhat sympathetic to the civilians that were being killed in North Vietnam and in South Vietnam. And if that's the case, then our cyborgs, our robots, our drones, whatever, will certainly make mistakes and will kill civilians on the ground. That happens in every war. Will just one of those incidents be enough to turn the American public against the war movement, even if we aren't losing people over there?
It takes a lot, though. Historically, that is what ended the Gulf War. Again, the Gulf War was incredible success. It was almost what would be called catastrophic success. And it was our overwhelming battlefield tactical success that got all of the generals together and said, whoa, we look like bullies here. And so it ends at 100 hours of ground war, right? And with the highway of death, with several Republican Guard top tier units just absolutely vanished. They ceased to exist. And so the casualties were so overwhelming that I do admit, Bruce, that you can look back at that. And while the Americans didn't stand up yet and demonstrate, I think that's why it ends so positively. America did not get up and demonstrate in spite of 100 to 150,000 dead Iraqis, another 75,000, captured, 75,000 displaced. It was just an overwhelming victory. But nonetheless, it is what caused fear in the American and allied administrations to say, oh, dude, we better stop. We are winning way quicker, way more than we could ever imagine. And so I do agree with what you're saying. There's that sentiment. But if you're telling me 6 died here and 100 died there and 2 died over here in the last 3 months, I don't know. I don't think Americans are that plugged in. I don't think they'd be that aware.
Well, things have changed in one respect. Like if you remember in Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, 18 Americans were killed. And it was a big deal in 1993. Mm-hmm. Colin Powell, who was, I believe, Secretary of State at the time, or Defense, I forget, he's held both posts, made a comment to a reporter. He goes, isn't it interesting? 18 dead would not have been worthy of a news story in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tolerance for casualties is way down, and it comes directly from Desert Storm, because we killed way more of ourselves in Desert Storm by accident than Saddam managed to kill us. Yeah. Far as I can tell, Saddam managed to kill no one with a bullet.
What part? So, have you guys, I don't know, have you guys ever wondered about, like, when it came to Vietnam, there was a lot of films, we've seen a lot of films, like, I think, what is it, Platoon? Which is the one who's like I Am Reality or whatever. What movie is that?
It was Platoon.
Yeah,
Sergeant Barnes. Sergeant Barnes.
And I was watching that movie. I don't know how accurate that is for every unit or whatever, every platoon in Vietnam. But then one thing that I was kind of wondering about, I was like when I was doing the FTX, even I was kind of laying there wondering about this, like when there was some off time. But the idea of the chain of command, even, and the effect of the chain of command and the way the U.S. military is set up today, and how that affects morale for a long-term, war. And the reason I mentioned that is because, and I had Mike Klein call me and talked about that. We were talking about this because, when you think about a long drawn-out war like that, it's very important to continue to have morale to even, fight effectively or have a clear head. I mean, like, there's times where, like, even during the FTX, I'm sitting there like really angry about something that's going on or the way a leader might be acting. And, you watch Platoon and you're kind of like, yeah, there's some of those leaders that were like straight up assholes, in that movie, portrayal. But you have to wonder, well, were the Viet Cong or were the Vietnamese, were they actually dealing with the same kind of leadership issues and on their side? Were they, and Mike Klein was saying, he brought up a point. He said, when it came to the Taliban, if somebody was tuning into their radio frequencies, and he said that no matter if they were losing or winning, they were super enthusiastic about what was going on. Apparently, they'd be yelling, "Yeah, we got them on the run. We got them. We got them. We got them. Yeah, we're winning. They were kicking their ass." And like, even if they were losing, like taking heavy casualties, apparently, well, what Mike was saying is that, like, if you listen to their radio, they were super enthusiastic, whether they're losing or winning the battle. And they were always like, "Yeah, we got them on the run. We're hitting them. We're just keep going, keep going, keep going." Oh, and then eventually, if they were losing, they'd be like, "Okay, we did really good, but we got to retreat now." And so let's everyone get back. We got them good today, though, boys. Like so my whole point is that like I often wonder on the Vietnamese side, on the Viet Cong side, were they sitting around in the freaking camp having interpersonal issues and a lot of drama and a lot of angst and anger and interpersonal conflict? And does the chain of command foster that in the sense that, you have a leadership that, top down leader. And if someone at the top sucks, you're going to feel it at the bottom. You know what I mean? So I don't know if they were more collectivist on the Vietnamese side, or if they didn't really matter because they would die so soon. I really don't know. But I guess one of those things, looking up at the stars at night during the FTX, I was thinking, did they really have that much interpersonal conflict on the other side? And is the chain of command overdue for a revamp as far as how they actually, do things? Is there a way to avoid some of that interpersonal, because they say the war's out there, it's not in here. Well, a lot of times, that can really bog down the morale if it is in here, and it can make it hard to fight out there,
Yeah. So I'll jump in there and try to answer some of that. And I mean, some of it's historical perspective. So we'd need to get into, crack that. And we're not going to do that tonight. I doubt it anyway. We don't have the resources. But the other thing is to just recognize that no two people's experience are ever the same. I mean, in the same battle, right? So you're not going to get that. The long and the short of it is, Gabe, that we're all human. And so when General Giap was entered 20 years after the war, he talked specifically about the North Vietnamese army and how devastated it was after the 68 Tet Offensive. Like that as many casualties as they lost in the battlefield, they lost twice that in desertions after the fact, after the months-long battle, and they were just absolutely defeated. Giap could not believe that the Americans didn't just stroll into North Vietnam at that time. And he said that. He said that on many occasions, or several occasions in public interviews, how badly beaten in 68 the North Vietnamese were. And so their morale was horrifying. How did this affect the VC? The Viet Cong, which remember are not North Vietnamese, but South Vietnamese, went on killing campaigns. They started killing the mothers of soldiers, and particularly those who had deserted. But those, not just those who deserted, those who had fought valiantly and died, the VC were so demoralized that they were literally murdering family members of dead warriors who they claimed had failed communism. So when you ask, were they suffering? They were suffering immensely. And I would have to point out that it's hard to say one person's suffering is worse than another person's suffering. What's your metric? What's your measurement? Where's that ruler stick? But I will say, dude, we lost 60,000, 62,000. They lost 900,000. They lost 15 times for every one American that died. They lost 15 dead. Of course they were suffering.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a known fact from a lot of memoirs that have since been published. Fighting the Americans wasn't scary. Going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a death sentence. Actually making it to South Vietnam, your chances of living improved dramatically. And that means making it to South Vietnam, you were going in to fight against the Americans. Just getting down the trail with all the bombing and all the shit we did. Tell me that didn't demoralize people. It had to.
Well,
Hey,
let's talk. Go ahead, Brent.
I don't want this to get hijacked and go down into a history lesson, because I think we're getting steered that way. So just to kind of reorient our sides here and get us back on track, I want to address a comment that I highlighted from Young Jay, which is, what effect do, essentially paraphrasing here, what effect do like UAVs and some of the modern technology have on the modern day battlefield? And if we could go back to that, and I'll pick it up here. Yes. I think the next war, I know there's some disagreement here, but I think the next war is going to be with a peer threat. Call it China, call it Russia. My opinion is it's going to be China. It's going to absolutely be a peer threat, and we will absolutely see the use of UAVs and some of these unmanned vehicles being used against us, as well as communications style warfare, hacking and all that stuff. With that being said, yes, there's going to be a large use of UAVs, but we also, you can't sit here with the mentality of, oh, all this stuff is going to work. There's jamming capabilities. Are those UAVs going to operate when the enemy's jamming them and vice versa? That's going to happen. So when that stuff happens, guess what? We're back to boots on the ground. We're back to freaking land nav with compasses and fucking pace counter beads because our GPS ain't going to work because the Chinese just blew up one of our satellites with a hypersonic missile.
Yeah, I agree completely. And we've even seen some of that in Syria, where we took our best technology out in Syria and all of a sudden it stopped working and there happened to be Russians in the area. Well, it's like we said in the last show, for every weapon someone creates, you're going to create a way to defeat it. And so that's the perpetual motion of warfare. So just as we think we have top of the line technology that can't be defeated, there's somebody holding that ace in their hand that can defeat it. Go back to the Germans in World War II at the U-boats. They thought they had a code that no one could crack, and we had been cracking it for a couple of years. So that I think that's just a good sort of first example that everybody is sort of familiar with, that again, when these technologies fail, whether they're robotics or they're UAVs or whatever future technology we can think of, when those fail, what do you go back to? You go back to what you know, which is boots on the ground, man against man.
Right. Absolutely. No argument there. But I don't know. When tanks were first introduced, one side had them, one side didn't. When aircraft were first weaponized, one side had it, one side didn't. And we can keep going on with every technology. And what I'm saying is the other side gets them. So it comes down to several things. And I think this is where Gabe was going with that, with casualties, high casualties. Let's go back to Verdun. Okay. World War I, Germans and the French are a bloodbath. 1.5 million have been lost in months. 1.5 million people. Why did they continue? Well, they continued for multiple reasons. It's been well studied and fairly well panned out. I mean, lots of room for interpretation here. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But the general consensus is this. One, if a nation people believe their cause is just, and yes, that gets to a lot of propaganda that helps them believe that. But nonetheless, doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. If they believe they're right and their cause is just, they're willing to go to war. They're willing to do what's necessary. Number two, if they believe they can still win, they'll tolerate very, very high casualties. And that's where you see Verdun and, and the Somme and Passchendaele. You see these just god-awful, months-long bloodbaths. And it is that people still, number one, believed that their cause was just, and number two, still somehow, whether it was propaganda and all bullshit, doesn't matter, they still believe that this can work out for us. These sacrifices are not in vain. It is when one of those two things or both of those things are lost that people say, oh, why are we here? So let's go back to Verdun and let's go back with cyborgs again. You don't have 1.5 million human lives lost. You have 1.5 million robots, electronics, circuits. It's just weight of plastics and metals. That's what you lost. And so how willing are they to do that? I think we're still talking about insurgencies where a cyborg walks down, this clunky ass cyborg walks down the street and then it can't even, hold itself up properly. It runs one battery and it falls over. I'm not talking about something that unsophisticated. I'm talking about, you want to make it comfortable? Let's move 5,000 years into the future. 5,000. 5,000 years in the future. Cyborgs look and act like me. They look like Blade Runner. Okay? Cyborgs. All right? And they're fighting in spaceships in off planets. And there's a Verdun kind of moment. First off, I'm going to argue that if you don't have cyborgs, you aren't even in the game. You're not even in the fight. This isn't our first war with cyborgs. This is our 80th war with cyborgs. And so if you don't have them, you're not in the fight. They already imposed their will on you. So it's going to be cyborg on cyborg. And it's not going to look camouflage and it's not going to look all fun. It's going to look something very similar to football, where because the people operating the cyborgs are sitting in their virtual reality on another moon. They need other cyborgs to be bright colors of pink and orange and black Bengal tiger stripes, and everybody looks like a friggin', what's those My Little Pony thing. That's their colors. Why? Because I need to recognize which one are you, so they don't light you up. Oh, just blew up another piece of plastic cyborg. Whoops, that one was ours. So it's not gonna, if you can think about that, then you start to realize it's gonna look far more like football and Napoleonic tactics. And the cyborgs aren't going to be clunky. They're going to look like Blade Runner. And I'm going to say if you're using humans, you don't stand a chance.
I don't know. Humanity's doing pretty good holding the Cylons at bay. Oh, that was this TV show. Sorry.
No, that's a good point, though. They did. They totally did.
It's interesting to say, there was a thing back during the Cold War. You'll remember this, Doc, that a tank can only last 18 seconds on the battlefield. Yeah, but think about it. If the tank can't survive, what can? And I think that's one thing a robot doesn't do is it doesn't think, it doesn't adapt. Like in the Falklands, when retaking South Georgia, a commando team's in a raft. It's gone. The engines died. They're drifting away in the middle of a snowstorm, and they hold radio silence because they know the plan. And only then, when they're like, "Okay, the plan should have gone off by now. The battle should be okay. Now we'll call for a rescue." And and they were able to be rescued because they could think to do that. A machine is not going to do that.
Agreed. And I don't even trust AI to do that. And if it could, then I would argue we better not create it. But what about this, Les? What about a machine that is plugged up cognitively to a human on a backside of a moon?
Oh, yeah. I mean, remote controlling the machines, that's entirely possible because it's still a form of infantry. I mean, imagine if you brought a soldier from the Revolutionary War forward, or better yet, you took a modern day Marine and you put him back in 1776. Just, they wouldn't recognize each other.
There's actually like an anime like that. It's called Gundam, like where they actually hook up like Gundams, like big giant robots that you pilot, but they actually kind of go into that issue, but basically they have a system called the Zero system that like it feeds battlefield data directly into the brain, and it can actually cause them to predict moves of the enemy based off of statistical factors. But basically the system will show you which it'll predict all the enemy's movement, and you can actually know what the enemy's going to do and which direction he's going to turn, this and that. And so you can already lead him and this and that, but it feeds it directly into their brain. And then in that series, it actually can drive the pilot crazy because it'll make him think something's already happened when it hasn't. So, and then they actually have that whole system, that whole thing where all the robots, what they were piloting, start becoming drones. But, yeah. But they actually use the system to defeat the drones. So they use that augmentation to basically combine the creativity side of a human, the spontaneousness, and the data side, the anal retentive side, I like to say, of the machine. So basically they get the best of both worlds to actually defeat machines.
Right. And I mean, to play off that and to get back to what Les was saying is that, no, I'm not saying the infantry mission ever goes away. What I'm saying is the infantry may evolve to the point where we don't recognize it any more than you said. Like a Napoleonic soldier probably would not, wearing their bright red British uniforms, wouldn't understand what the hell a modern day British soldier was doing. Okay, they wouldn't recognize each other. I'm saying that it will continue to morph along those lines, and that's just in 200 years, right? So what's going to happen over the next 200 years? Will they be able to continue to recognize each other, not just their technology, but even, how they function? That said, I agree with Gabe that, it comes down to technologies, and if you're controlling something by technology, you aren't AI. Now, you might be AI assisted, but you're controlling it by technologies. And of course, then your vulnerable point is your link, right? Where I'm reading the comments over here, and everybody's commenting on that. Everybody's caught that. They're like, look, if it's AI, hack it. If it's a link, block it. That's always going to be the downfall and the weakness of this system until you have, Skynet, right? Skynet is, individual AIs that think for themselves and robots that, kill all humans. Okay, then we're fighting Terminator. But even that's infantry, isn't it?
I think in general that technology, all that information technology, it's basically negating the need for the current command structure, because you could take care of more things yourself. As if you have your own personal drone and you fly it over the battlefield, you don't need to call that in anymore. But I think in general, that's going to have. It's kind of what I was talking about last time. Like you're going to have that. All that does is it decentralizes the command structure even more, because eventually you don't need that centralized command to get as much of that stuff back down to the soldiers. So like you don't have to go up to the chain of command and then get it come back down. Every soldier is going to have their own, all that information plugged in. And eventually that chain of command might be something that falls back on that 3 steps later than it normally would. So, it's definitely decentralizing things.
I wonder though, Doc, this is more of a question maybe than a point, but you talked about the big boys on the block would be having AI technology, whether it's robotic or whatever the case may be, fighting against the other. So we can just use the United States and China, for example, because I like the idea. It's kind of old school Cold War for me. So China has X amount of these robots and America has X amount of these robots, and we let them go at it. Well, what happens when one robotic side defeats the other, and maybe China has 10,000 of these left over, and we've used up all of ours. We know what we are capable of as Americans. We bombed women and children in Nagasaki and Hiroshima just to make the Japanese surrender and feel the pain. We're willing to set them on fire, obliterate them, and those that don't die immediately die slowly from their burns, and those that aren't fortunate enough to die slowly from their burns die from radiation poisoning. We didn't care that those weren't military targets. We didn't care that their troops weren't there. We wanted their women and children. Let's be honest. We can do that. We're capable of that as human beings. And even as Americans, when we walk around thinking about what great moral people that this country is. China certainly wouldn't bat an eye at it. And there are other countries that wouldn't bat an eye at it either. So what's to say once the robots have been defeated, that we don't fall right back on our old ways, whether it's rock and stick or bombs through conventional means, whatever the case may be, and just start killing one another again, at which point we're right back into the infantry fight, aren't we?
Well, and that's why it's important, to have a moral foot to stand on. In general, when I think about war with China, war with China really isn't. If you look at the current trends in this country and leadership, I don't really see very much difference between those two ideologies. They both want top-down control of the economy. They both want fascism. If it's going to be one country versus the other, if it came down to war with China, at this point, I don't think the United States would be able to, afford that war or win that war necessarily. At this point, to me, it'd be nuke it from orbit, because you would really need to completely obliterate all of their manufacturing and everything. And there's no point in protracting that war, because you're probably not going to win it. Unless you go back to your fundamentals that made this country a bit great, sound money, freedom, all these things that give us the moral high ground and actually give us the morale to fight a war like that. If you're just going to fight between who's going to be your master, who's going to be your fascist master, I don't see a big push from the civilian side or the public or the military side to even to go in a war like that, especially if you're going to lose it because you don't have the resources to compete. So in general, if it came to a war with China, I'd say right now, just nuke it right now. Don't even go to the islands or nothing, because you're not going to win by being by half-assing your own tactics that could make you win, and them going full-blown, slave communism, fascism, super production factory mode. You're not going to win that.
China's a nuclear power, bud. You nuke them,
and that's why you would need to. You would need to have counters to those too. But either way, if I was president right now, the first thing I would do is EMP harden the infrastructure, all critical infrastructure. I'd decentralize all the farming and food. I would start getting these cities, an exit out, getting those bunkers done, whatever you need to do. And I wouldn't even try to compete with 1 billion, whatever, how many people they have, 2 billion, 1 billion. If you look at them, we talked about body armor last week. They're not wearing body armor, and their commanders are saying, hey, we don't want them to wear body armor because it's going to kill their spirits and morale. Whenever I hear a commander say something like, I want you to put your spiritual armor on instead of the body armor, to me, that sounds like human wave attack. And they did. And, that's just going to be another Vietnam, and this time with 1 billion as opposed to, a much smaller size country like Vietnam. So unless we're going to get shit back on the rails and set this country straight with fundamentals, I would just nuke it from orbit and shoot down everything coming in and hunker down, because it's going to come, the slow way or the fast way.
What do you think about that, Doc?
That's what the Cold War was, right? It was a stalemate of mutually assured destruction. Someone in the comment way earlier on in the show mentioned MAD, mutually assured destruction. And so we fought wars through proxies. And I think that, we were talking around it. We said, well, China's a nuclear power, Russia's a nuclear power, America's a nuclear power, and there are others as well. So we still have MAD as the deterrent that holds those large players in place. It keeps them empowered. And I don't see that going away anytime in the near future. But if I'm going to play the game, this is a thought game. So here, let me play the game. So I create an army of robots, and my robots go forward into country X, a nuclear power, mind you. And probably I'm not going to send them into country X, right? Because we're going to say, you go to country X, that's a nuclear power, and they start to lose. They're going to nuke America. Gasp, touch the pearls. No, not that. So, all right. So I guess I'm not going to send my robots against country X. I'll have to send my robots against all the territories that are important to country X, but that are not part of sovereign country X. So now I'm back to a war of proxy. This is starting to sound a whole lot like 1946 through 1990. I'm fighting wars of proxy with or without my robots, but not actually going into country X because they can kill us. That said, take the nukes out. Take the nukes out for just a second, and I'm going to say this. Now let's go to a football game. So I've got two teams. I got a football game, one team that I'm up against, and they're my opponents, and I've got our team, and I'm going to go send robots in for my team. And now my robots are going to be clumsy and fall apart and break, but they're going to break enough of the human bad guy team or my opponent team that by the time I call my humans forward, my human football players, my cyborg robots have smashed the other team, and there's only some skeletal force of their team left to play football, and my team's going to crush them. My team of humans now is going to crush them because I spent my robots up front, and now I have my humans. I think this was panned out in the movie Ender's Game, right? Something along those lines. So what I'm trying to say is, if it's going to be a game of attrition, that's what proxy wars are, and that's what total war is. It's a game of attrition. If it's going to be a game of attrition, I guess the side that has the most robots is likely going to win, because the robots aren't going to last. And we're all saying that. Well, the robots they're vulnerable this way and they're vulnerable that way, and they're all going to be crushed and they'll eventually fail. I'm agreeing with you. And then the humans come. Well, if you don't have robots, then my robots were destroyed, killing most of your military.
States has the technology to intercept most of these ballistic missiles. They've had it probably for about, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. And it's going to be in the form of, like, if they could use anti-grav craft to actually intercept that. Now, they may not use that. And if they didn't use that, to me, that tells me that they don't want to win the war. So, you know, in the meantime, you know, you're going to have basically something like Angel Has Fallen. If I can pull it up for you guys, if you're actually going to fight a war of China, this is what it's going to look like right here for you as the grunt. I don't know if you can see that.
Not yet.
Can you see that now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what it's going to be like. Just like this scene right here, where they launch all these right here, and then it turns into, let's see here, like this. Swarms of drones flying in. These are going to be fucking made for like $1 a fucking shot. They're going to be rolling in, and they're just going to freaking punch in on everything like this. This is how it's going to look as a grunt for you if you're fighting China. I'm probably 50-80% sure this is how it's going to look for everybody. Okay. So with that in mind, you know, if they're going to outproduce you like that, we don't produce stuff like that in that quantity. We can't do it even if we want to at this moment. We would have to return to a strong export economy like we had in the 50s, and we would have to actually, you know, be able to outmatch them in production and strength of our economy. That's what's going to determine the actual, you know, end war. Not only that, you have to have, because you're going to have to beat them both in production, so technology, and numbers. So in my opinion, that's where I get to nuke it from orbit.
Gabe, you gotta consider all aspects. So people get wrapped around like, oh, drone swarms, right? Like we've talked about before. Like there's a counter to this stuff, right? You have man packs that are worn at the squad level that jam signals, right? We have, I'm just being simplistic here, the Sea Whiz, right? So I picture in the future, you have little squad Sea Whizzes that once these things start coming in, your little fucking squad Sea Whiz is and just taking them out as fast as they can come in.
That's why they're pushing for all those laser mounted strikers. The strikers mount on lasers. They want to be able to go beep, 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 beep. They can hit all of them like a mosquito.
So this all circles back to, you know, is human infantry obsolete? And I would argue that it's not, because, you know, there's going to be counters to this future stuff. Now, I kind of want to circle back. You know, we've pushed forward a couple hundred years, I think. Thousands at times, you know, talking about robots operating from the moon or moons, different moons.
Sex robots.
And we're in pink. Let's go back to now, because I've seen a few comments talking about, you know, current incidences, and one that was already brought up in Syria where the Russians were jamming our UAVs and they weren't working. And I've confirmed that. I've talked to a guy one time that was deployed there, and that happened. All right. So that's a thing. But let's talk about like thermal technology and the robots we do have. The current robots are not capable. So let's think one shepherd going through these woods, and, you know, the freaking thorns and the vines and stuff. You know, I saw some Yahoo story about some fucking sniper rifle mounted on a little wheeled, you know, robot thing. okay, that thing's not going to come get through the woods in 100 years. So we're not there now. Thermal technology, yes, thermal is great, but people again, they have this misconception about thermal, like this is end all be all.
Yeah.
Look, we just had a guy that murdered his fiance and went and hid in the woods, and nobody found him. Nobody found him until they said, "All right, we're calling the search off, and we're going to open this back up to the public." And then the father comes out and says, "Oh, yeah, let me check this spot where he normally goes," and they took him right to him. All right, this guy, who knows when that guy killed himself, but he was out there in the woods. Nobody could find him. You see this footage all the time about police chases from helicopters and stuff. Yeah, well, that's all over residential neighborhoods. When we're operating as grunts, we're trying. We're more cognizant of overhead cover now. Our arty netting, contains this black mesh to help reduce thermal signatures. So, again, at this point right now, I don't see human infantry being eliminated anytime soon. The UAVs and the drones, the technology is great, but I still think a conventional war with China, and going back to what Doc said, the nuclear deterrence, I think a war with China will largely be conventional, and it'll just be a conventional bloodbath.
And let's remember under that, let's look at how the Chinese have performed militarily. Basically, they haven't. I mean, they took 1 million casualties to get a stalemate in Korea. In 1979 and 1984, when their punitive expeditions against the Vietnamese pretty much handed them their ass each time.
Sure.
The Chinese military has not performed. And we have 11 going on 12 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that carry about 80 to 90 combat aircraft. That makes each one of those aircraft carriers one of the largest air forces in the world whenever it's deployed. The Chinese had to take a Russian carrier that was half built, took them 20 years to finish it, took them another 10 years to build the next one, and about 8 years to build the current one they're doing with that has about half the capability of ours. The Chinese can make numbers, and quantity does have a quality all its own, but they can't make great numbers of really good things. Look at their Air Force. Yes, they have their J-10s, but a lot of it's still just basically MiG-21 copies. They have a lot of planes, and that counts for something, don't get me wrong, but they're not really good planes. Look at their tanks. There's no Chinese equivalent of an M1. It's not there. The same with their APCs. They're going through a new rifle concept right now.
Hey, Les, there's no Marine Corps equivalent to an M1 either.
Ow.
So,
oh man.
Not anymore. No, there isn't.
So Russia, when it came to this issue, they don't have the quantity or the planes that can match ours. But what Russia's been doing is they've been trying to get planes that come about 80% to the capabilities, 80 or 90, and what they've been focusing on is missile technology. So like air-to-air missiles, beyond visual range missiles that are ground launched, and their idea is instead of actually having a trophy like a unicorn vehicle, they're just going to have a whole bunch of really good missiles saturate the combat environment to the point where they can shoot beyond visual range, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. And that's going to be their tactic, is basically instead of having a bunch of planes, they're going to have planes that can hold a lot of missiles. That's why the new the new stealth jet from freaking China is a bigger jet. It actually is kind of meant to house more missiles on the inside than an F-22 or F-35. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to be using quantity in the form of missiles. And the United States is actually trying to do the same thing, thank God, by having the actual, I think it's called the Spike missile. So it's a multi-use missile that it's used like a Stinger. It can be used as an air to ground, air to air. I think they're even trying out missiles that can shoot down other missiles, and they're going to have like a rotary pack of that on an F-35 or whatever. But the idea there is to augment whatever fleets they have. They're just going to go quantity over quality, or they're going to try to basically have quantity and quality in the cheapest form, which is the missile.
Hey, real quick, nobody has an A-10 type aircraft. That's not entirely true. The Soviet Su-25 Frogfoot, I think.
The Frogfoot, that's their equivalent.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm sure other countries have something similar.
Definitely the Chi-Coms, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. So yeah, you're right. Look, they're gonna, you can call it a missile. We've called it a missile many, many different times. Today, the more common word is artillery. Okay. And you're like, oh, no, a missile is different than a gun. It's all artillery, dude. The first artillery was missile. And so it came from China. So my point here is, it's not that artillery doesn't frighten me as an infantryman. It's just devastating. It's incredibly effective. It's also, it doesn't win the war. It doesn't win the battle. It doesn't. It's just artillery, dude. And well, they're going to have a lot of it and they're going to mass. That's called the Red Team Army Doctrine. It's always been that since World War I. Yes, they're just going to shoot a whole lot of artillery. And you know, in certain areas, in certain environments, and in certain targets, it's fairly effective. In other ones, it's horribly ineffective. So it's not a silver bullet. I'm not worried about that. I'm also not too terribly worried about China anytime right now in the very, very near future, because they don't have the ability to project their force. The biggest thing, even their Air Force, they don't. But the biggest thing, of course, people talk about their blue water Navy. They don't have the ability to invade Australia, let alone America. And so they don't. The other thing is that they really don't have a good track record. For that matter, neither does Russia. If we're going to come right down to it, we can get into that. But China doesn't have a good track record. The last time China invaded a country successfully was the early 50s, and it was Tibet. They beat a bunch of monks, okay? And they've been there since. But anyway, the point is that they just don't have a really strong track record of being an empire, yes, but of actually projecting their military, not so much. And so I'm less worried about that. But I will say that what does bother me about that prospect is proxy wars. So people go, oh, what about the Koreas and what about Taiwan? And I'm like, yeah. What about the, this body of water or that body of water and the corresponding airspace? Yeah, I mean, these are proxy wars. And yeah, I can definitely see, some real threat there. Okay. So, but I guess it gets back to the question, have we somehow eliminated the mission and or need for infantry? No, that even when I'm playing devil's advocate and I'm projecting 5,000 years into the future, why not? It's hard for you to make a counter when I'm making things up in fantasy land. So this kind of steals, you can make up a counter just as well. It'll all be inflatable robot elephants. I don't know. But my point here is that even when I'm doing that, I'm still not saying the infantry mission has gone away. I'm only just re-describing and redefining infantry. But the need to take and hold land and interact with populace.
Well, I would say that although China's blue water capability has not actually reached fruition and they haven't actually successfully matched our might in that sense, we still have, I would say that their projection of power has still been fairly successful to the United States. I mean, I think one person said it like recently about, in the financial way, like, basically China, we're becoming an outpost of China because all of our stuff is being imported from them. So in a way you could say that they've already kind of, their influence on the homeland is not necessarily militarily, but economically, it's still, they've got us by the balls. And in my opinion, by the time they get those fleets available for blue water, expedition, they're basically, I mean, if by the time they get there, we're probably going to have a system like theirs that's very compatible and very, welcoming at that point. We're already seeing, that absolutely subversive nature of fascism or socialism in the United States. So, I mean, once again, we have to have strong footing and moral standing on our own doorstep before we step off into the world. And if we don't have that, we're not going to win either way. It's a lose-lose situation. That right there is going to be the biggest threat. It's going to be ourselves from within. So I don't think that they're too big of a hurry for that, because I think the way things are panning out are going to help them, get here without firing a shot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And, I mean, when you look at the history of the two most caste societies and the two most arrogant societies, although there's a few others we could throw in there, but we'll say England meets China. And both of them waited. Their history is they're waiting for the other one just to obviously adopt the British/Chinese way, because ours is the superior. And I think that's actually been China's success historically in dominating, and their empire is one of, you will see the error of your ways and you will adopt our ways. And particularly with the communist, capitalist, centralized government of China, I think I'm worried. Let me soften that and say I'm concerned that the United States of America government looks at China with a bit of jealousy. I think our politicians would love to have one party.
Exactly. You have people like Dianne Feinstein, who, if I could really boil it down, you have people that envy China's power in their top-down power. Oh, yeah. And they really want to have that here. And, these people are basically, subverters. They're I mean, at the end of the day, we could beat China in a lot of by using the American principles that we had. I should say we don't have them right now, but the fact that we're not using those principles, and now we're basically trying to outdo somebody who's playing the game 100% versus playing the game, and while we ourselves are playing their game 50% or 80%, we're not. It's a very concerning thing, because we're not going to win by playing by their rules, ever, because we're not going to be like them 100%. They're already like that. You're not going to be half fascist and then win against a full fascist. You either have to have your principles versus theirs, like how we beat the Russians, how we basically made them topple. But we're not using that game no more. We're using fascism versus fascism. So, to me, it's not set up to win.
And you guys need to jump in here. I'm like, Les just got up and left. Yeah, I mean, honestly, and to all of you, to Brent and Bruce, do you ever have this thing? And I'm sure, I'm just talking to Hollywood here. I'm sorry, Gabe. Bad habit. Sorry about that, Gabe. Do you ever have that thought? I wonder when it was that England, as it built its empire and became an influencer all over the world, at what point did they cross the line and say, holy shit, we became the bad guys? I wonder when that was for France. When did France, what is it, Napoleon? Is that the demarcation as soon as he got it? Everybody, every one of these countries, Russia, was it when they became communist, or was it long before they became communist? China, the same thing. At what point did this country start up from the grassroots, say, hey, we're going to build our own society, our own language, our own science and arts, and we're going to have this great culture, and we're going to be the coolest thing ever in the history of people? And then one day they woke up and they were just the wicked, Darth Vader oppressors. And I don't know, is this why the old adage, or the old proverb of boiling a frog, where the frog keeps incrementing so slowly it doesn't recognize the change in its environment? And if that's true, if it is so slow that we don't recognize it, are we going to become the bad guys? in the next generation or two?
Well,
Well,
Doc,
evil.
I don't think that's maybe the case with Russia. Maybe it's happened several times, but when they start pulling down statues of Lenin and Stalin, I think that the country has come to the realization that that's not a history they're very proud of, and that might have been a mistake. I don't know exactly. I suppose Germany could say the same about Hitler. That was a little more of an abrupt change, and had Nazi Germany won the war or not been totally defeated, I'm not sure what that would look like today. Maybe there would still be statues of him in the country. I don't know. But certainly for Russia, who was victorious in World War II, and now they've pulled down statues of their World War II leaders and their Marxist leaders and their Leninist leaders. I think we could probably say that's probably a pretty good point. Maybe the splintering of the Soviet Union also, a lot of that happened outside of Russia. But I don't know, just my 2 cents. Other countries, England, I don't know. Do you still see statues of King George? Probably. I have a feeling that England doesn't ever see themselves as bad guys. I think that even today they're still a little sore about us dirty redneck Americans and the antics that we pulled in the Revolutionary War. They still hold their head high, and I think if they regret anything, it's probably more colonization in other countries like Africa and other third world countries. Africa's a continent, I get that, but you get my point, rather than them as a country being ashamed of anything that they've done. For us as a country, I don't know. Les, I'll pitch it to you. Do you think that we're at some point that we're starting to see ourselves as the bad guys, or are we still morally pure, I think, as maybe Gabe would put it?
I still think we're the good guys. I believe that Americanism is a great thing that we export. We export freedom. We export self-expression. We export representative government. I like to use South Korea as the great experiment. You know, when we stopped the Chinese in 1953, because by then the NKs were out of it, it was really just the Chinese and us. Syngman Rhee took over, leading South Korea. Syngman Rhee was the prototypical dictator. He was a flat-out dictator. And then he was replaced by another guy who was basically a benevolent dictator. And then those guys were replaced by the first forms of representative government. And yeah, there was a big period of unrest in South Korea in the 80s. Students led the way of the protests and all that. But look at South Korea now, fully representative government of its people. And you can argue, is America's government as representative it should be? That's a debate for another time. But the point of it is, yes, I think we are still the good guys. I think wherever we go, we improve things. And for that example, Panama, Philippines, you know, what other nation conquers a nation and rebuilds it, a la Japan, Germany, Italy? Nobody. Nobody does that. You know, Russia reinvaded South Ossetia in Georgia. Nobody's heard about that great Russian rebuilding program. Now, what did Russia do to rebuild the Warsaw Pact? Nothing, really, that wasn't in their own interests. You know, where we gave money freely to everybody in Western Europe, you know, to get them back on their feet. So, you know, yes, we do horrible things sometimes. I'm not proud of the bombing of Dresden, but at the same time, overall, I think we do way more good than we do evil.
The thing to keep in.
Hey, I just want to piggyback on Les's point. Yes, 100%. And, you know, we got all these caravans of migrants moving or making their way towards this country. Now, I don't want of hundreds and thousands of freaking illegal aliens coming into the country. By no means can our country sustain that. All right. But the fact that they are trying to get here speaks volumes. Okay. And, you know, you think back to last year with the race riots and all this stuff about, you know, the media was painting the United States as this, you know, racist country. Well, look at a large percentage of those migrants that are heading this way. Haitians. I mean, they're black. You know, why would they want to come to a racist country? And they're coming here by the the truckloads. And then, again, talking about taking countries and building them, Iraq and Afghanistan, we took them over. And I was told for years, we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan for oil. Where's the fucking oil? Never got it.
Why is my gas so high?
I know. So
Yeah, no shit.
Where's that pipeline coming straight out of Iraq to here? A big one.
We spent all this
40
money
feet.
rebuilding their countries, and we've left them. And in Afghanistan's case, the enemy took it back over after we left. Iraq, thankfully, is still kind of teetering in there, but Afghanistan, I mean, we just handed it back to the enemy after we whooped their ass for 20 years.
Mhm.
Yeah. And to piggyback on Brent piggybacking off of me, I grew up in the Florida Keys. That's where I went through the early part of high school, middle school, and all that. And I went to school with kids whose parents bundled them into rafts and boats of every type to cross some of the most dangerous waters in the world to get away from where they're at, their communist freedom of Cuba, or their just horrible, horrible economic existence in Haiti, to come to horribly racist, oppressive America. Because it's so bad here, they went to all that risk to get here.
So what I would say is, like, your original question was that you, Doc, who was asking, at what point do they cross that line and know they're evil or whatever. I think in general, evil people don't really know that they're evil. I don't think that they really have a good grasp of right and wrong or evil. I think it takes hitting rock bottom for evil people to really come to that realization that they're wrong. It's kind of like when you have a bully or whatever, they're gonna think they're on top of the world and they're right, and right up until the point where they get their ass whooped and they're on the ground on the wet, gravelly fucking, asphalt. That's when they realize, oh man, maybe I should rethink things. And in general, I think that most of these countries, including our own, will have to go through a period like that to realize what we're doing, where we're going wrong. A good example of that is, like I keep bringing up the economy. The fact that we're printing all this money when we used to have the gold standard currency. The only reason we're here is because our money was backed by gold. It was backed by tangible assets. And, we got off of that in 1972 and that was supposed to be temporary. We haven't done it. And now the only reason we can fund half these things and have this big, giant, out of control government spending is because we just borrow it out of thin air and promise to pay it back with IOUs. So when you run into a situation where, a country, when you're not doing something the right way, there's oftentimes a delay, like a domino effect. And, it doesn't happen like whenever you do something wrong, sometimes it doesn't hit you on the head the moment you do it. Sometimes it takes a few years, or in this case, it might take 30 or 40 years for the United States to realize, oh, this has actually got consequences that I don't want to go down. And evil people, again, the less the more delay that consequence is, the harder it is for them to make the connection that
Sure.
they're wrong.
So you're talking about the banality, what's often been called the banality of evil, or
Well, evil people do everything they can to insulate themselves from consequences.
well, and it's also that when you look at the most horrendous acts in, fascism, communism, and everything else, and these people are called to a trial, what they'll say is, look, I'm a bureaucrat. I'm a manager in a civil, servant sort of position. My bosses were saying, do X. I was just doing X as efficiently as I possibly could. And so it's like, wow, you are so incredibly evil, but it's not like any kind of rewarding sense of it, because when they come clean, they're just saying, man.
When you're on the winning team, it's hard to, when you're on the winning team, you're riding that wave. You know what I mean? You're riding that wave of victory. And only when you get your ass handed to you and get knocked down, that's when you have to rethink things. Well, what did I do wrong here? Germany had that happen.
So bringing it back around, I guess the reason
Nefarious people don't think they're nefarious.
right. And so that's just it. So I'm afraid of two things. And, well, one thing mostly, and I'm wondering if the infantry question, if the in a broader sense doesn't have another application. Here's what I mean. America is no longer a republic. I think most of us agree with that. It's not. It's supposed to be, and we desperately want it to be, but it's not. It's a two-party, pay-to-play corporate system. And the corporate system is run by bureaucrats. That's why the BATF is the really one we're all going to know. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive. They just make shit up as they go. There's not rules. There's not laws. There's not voted on. It's just, this is what I think is right. So, you know, Meade number 2 pencils are now considered machine guns. You're all criminals. And so you go, what the hell? Because they read somewhere that the pen is mightier than the sword, so they figure a number 2 pencil is a machine gun. And so I don't know. It's just the most asinine, stupid thing, and yet it's not our corrupt political leaders. I know they're corrupt. You don't get to be a leader until you're corrupt in politics in a democracy, and so they're corrupt. I get it. That's not who's screwing us over. Who's screwing us over are a bunch of bureaucrats who were never elected to office. They're in the civil servants, and it was time to promote them to GS-15, and now they make rules that ruin people's lives. So this is what it is. You want to ask me about the relevance of infantrymen, and maybe I'm expanding that a little too far to include Minutemen, but I think it's having the capacity, go back to mutually assured destruction, having the capacity to bayonet the bureaucrats in the throat, having the capacity to, having the knowledge to, having the organization and the means, the material means, to bayonet bureaucrats in the throat, to get them in a building and set them on fire. I think this is maybe the most relevant you can be in a nation that's supposed to be a republic, but is really run by a bunch of bureaucrats. What keeps them up at night, hopefully, is fear.
Well, it goes back. It goes back to the lack of. It goes back to denial of reality, and and like when you were talking about the ATF, they're only able to do all those things because they've avoided reality for a long time.
Yeah.
Whenever you avoid reality, the pendulum's going to swing the other way eventually and hit you in the face, and that's exactly what the ATF is going to find out someday. When they try to enact all those laws, they're going to get, just like just like Rambo said, they're going to wind up in a war they won't believe if they ever try to enforce half of those laws on a massive level.
So that's what I keep coming back to. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, as do many others, really bright people. And they're saying, look, good guys aren't complacent, nice guys. Good guys, good men are dangerous men who choose to be good, because the reality is they can clean house. So maybe when we say the relevance of infantrymen or the relevance of your combat fighter or your we call them light fighters, we call them we call them Minutemen. Maybe that's their relevance here inside the United States, is to keep our now bureaucratic corporate government in check, maybe so that we don't become the bad guys. I don't know. That's a philosophical look. Obviously, I took it down that direction. Sorry.
Think about, we should probably get back. I know Brent wants to get back on topic with, some of the technology, and he's probably sitting here like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But one last point I would make is there was a general in Nazi Germany, I forget his name, but there was another situation that kind of goes to this, right? And a lot of evil people are, like I've said, are out of touch with reality. I mean, one of these things, one general, like on the Eastern Front when they were fighting the Russians, I think the whole reason, they took a lot of casualties to the cold, and half of the reason why was because this general was like, hey, yeah, it's snowing out, but I often enjoy a brisk walk in the snow in shorts. And I do that oftentimes when I'm hiking. And then the trains came back from the war with the Russian, the Eastern Front, and some of these German soldiers were getting off the train with their balls frozen off, literally falling off their freaking crotch. And at that moment, he was like, "Oh my God, what have I done? I was totally out of touch with reality. This wasn't just me going on a stroll in my shorts in downtown in Germany. This is sub-zero temperatures." And a lot the overwhelming consensus of all these people, no matter what evil kind of people they are, is they are out of touch with reality. Their perception doesn't line up with what's actually happening, how the world actually works. Whether it's the communists believing they can have a utopia by stealing from people, whether it's these bureaucrats that believe they can use the pen over the sword and get everything they want, and they can just write, "Hey, hand grenades are illegal now," and nobody has them like magic wands. All these people, they all have one thread in common, and that's they don't accept reality for what it is. And when you don't accept reality for what it is, you're going to cause unnecessary suffering. There is necessary suffering in this world. If you want freedom, sometimes you have to die for it to defend it. But there is also unnecessary suffering, and these bureaucrats are very good at creating that. Whether it be putting people in jail for no reason for an action that's a right, an action that doesn't cause harm, whether it be neglecting to give them snow gear because they don't think that they need it, because they like brisk walks in the freaking park in Germany. All these people are out of touch. They're basically bougie people. It's a bougie mentality, and we help foster that by letting them do what they want, by treating them better than they treat you. That's how evil people, get further along down the road than they should, is because they're out of touch with the reality. And every time we treat them nicely, every time you treat them the way they are not treating you, they get elevated, and they actually see that as confirmation bias, that they belong where they belong, and you belong where you belong. That's how they see that. The only way to change that is to give them a healthy dose of reality, just like any bully on the freaking playground. But we should probably go back to what Brent wanted to talk about, which is, drones and thermal and smart weapons. Brent, were you able to use your thermal? I know you had that AGM thermal. I don't know. I never saw you pull it out, but I don't know if you ever used it during One Shepherd last.
Let me just say that I understand 100% that when we start these live streams, that the conversation is going to go high and to the right every time. There's no shockers here whatsoever. To answer your question, yes, I did. At one point, I think my AGM turned on its own, and the battery ran out, so I didn't get to use it for the entirety of the FTX. But I will go back to our night raid where my point man had a bridge, and one side was a thermal. It was like a 14 size thermal, and the other side was standard MBG, and he was my point man. But we didn't even locate the enemy until we were within about 50 meters within that. So
I couldn't see him either.
If that tells you anything, I mean, it's like, yeah, thermal's great. Absolutely. It's awesome capability, but it's not the end all be all. I mean, we were damn near right on top of them before we actually saw them with our thermals, because we were in such thick woods.
I was 5 people behind you on the night raid. On that night raid, I think I kind of bumped myself up a little bit because I was kind of in the back, but I wanted to be kind of on the front. So I kind of skipped a few lines, and I didn't even see them. And I actually heard them walking around before I saw them on thermal or anything. So there's definitely limitations on that. We have one member that's asking all about thermal and what scope he should get. And in general, the foliage out there is so thick that, it's very difficult to see anything, but it does help you locate them once you're in the fight and you have an idea of where they are, and much better than with night vision. One technology people should probably be aware of too is called, let's see here. It would be called SAR, Synthetic Aperture Radar. And it's, we were talking about drones earlier. But one technology is called SAR, Synthetic Aperture Radar. And what that is it's like thermal, but it lets you see through canopies and other things with radar, with basically radio waves and frequencies, bounces it off the ground and detects, minute changes using algorithms, artificial intelligence. And basically they point radio waves at something and bounce it back. And then a computer generates an image off of trillions of megabytes of data. And that's one thing that's kind of coming into fruition. Well, it's been in fruition for a while, but we might start seeing that kind of stuff. That's actually maybe helmet augmented, or even drone mounted, personal drone. We already see fear on drones.
Yeah, I think drones is something that moves. And I'm not just talking flying drones, maybe even moving drones. Here's the problem with all of that is that you're getting an electronic signature. And the military is becoming more and more aware. That video clip that you showed, and admittedly it's a fiction, it's a movie, but there have been drone swarms, and yes, you can use artillery that way, meaning drones can deliver your munitions. But here's the thing, you need to lock in on something. I don't care whether you use thermal or, digital visioning or radar or something. You need something. You have to lock in on a target. Otherwise, it's a dumb bomb. And that's fine. That can work too. You can plug in and say, well, just go to this grid square. Okay, fine. It can do that. But here's the thing. The more we use active sensors to find the enemy, the larger our electronic footprint. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. You say, oh, Doc's saying this is all wrong and we shouldn't use it. No, I'm just saying, realize every time you turn it on, your electronic signature just went through the friggin' roof. And if you're fighting a peer or even a near peer, you just said to everybody, here I am. Here I am. Here's my platoon. So it's not an end-all be-all. It's wonderful, and particularly if your enemy is not a peer or a near peer, then it becomes even more viable. But realize that it comes with a cost.
Right, anybody. I mean, peer threat. I mean, it's going to be brutal. I'm telling you guys. These kill chains and everything. It's going to be brutal, and I don't think we're going to be fighting little goat herders again for a while. I think the next one's going to be a big one, because we're getting weakened spiritually, morally, and our whole country is at its
sexually.
So, and our enemies right now do not fear us. So
no, they don't.
Hey, I'm gonna share an image with you guys, and I think you're gonna like it. Hold on.
I'm really nervous right now, Gabe.
Yeah. Don't be.
It can't be any worse than the Good Doctor sex robots from a couple hundred years.
It's gonna be better than that. Can you see this right here?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So this right here is an example of SAR that's drone based. Usually it's actually on a satellite, but by having it closer to the ground on a drone, you can get higher detail. But here's an example of what SAR might look like on a plane. So they can fly over, a jungle, this and that, and they might not see anything. But once you zoom in on it, like on the left, you can see this image right here. This is the jungle with a visual camera, Mm-hmm. So you've got visual image, and then with SAR on the right, this is a Mayan jungle. They were looking for some temples. They're like, we don't have any trace of all these cities. Where did they go? Well, if you put SAR over there, you'll start seeing stuff like this.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so basically by flying over and taking images, you can actually see right here, there's actually a whole bunch of roads and houses and everything under the jungle, under that canopy that you don't even see. So what that means for the individual warfighter is you're really going to have to take in consideration that there's always going to be something in the sky that could probably see you, and thermal screening is probably the least you could do. But right now they're using these to detect landmines. So they'll fly over an area, and they can actually detect minute differences in grains of sand over a battlefield. And so they'll scan a battlefield one day, they'll come over again, and they'll be able to see basically every little disturbed piece of, dirt. We're talking like, grains of sand level detail, to the point where they could actually say, oh, hey, there's a landmine right there. Or there's a cluster of landmines going in a row across this field now that weren't there yesterday or a week ago. So
Dave, why do you have a Pornhub tab on your browser?
He minimized it right down.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah.
Did you see that, Bruce? Did you see that? It's the new technology. Not only finds you, it finds like ancient camps from your ancestors and bombs that. It's like, I'm not just going to get you. I'm going to get your family in Sweden, dude.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to get your granddad's abandoned house.
Yeah, wow.
Originally, they were using these the original demand was to find the entrances of bunkers during when we were, the Cold War. So they're trying to find every goddamn, entrance to every underground bunker. And, they can actually, see the entrances, that no matter how well, camouflaged they are, using that radar. And I think eventually we're going to start seeing that at the squad level, at the infantry level, where, you wear those goggles and they'll have a satellite overhead or a UAV, and it's going to project basically the terrain for you in that, basically in a hologram. So you'll be able to see everything.
So you know that the OH-58 helicopter, Kiowa, had the ball up on top, and it was a pulsar. You'll recognize the last part of that acronym, right? SAR. Okay, so it had the pulsar, and it could look down into the ground and see what was going on. So my story with that, it's a pretty damn cool thing. And the OH-58 would be the scout that called in the Apaches. That's how the Army at least used to do it. I'm sure it's still the same concept, no matter which airframes are doing the work now. But the pulsar is this bubble that says over the top of the props on an OH-58. And when we were getting ready to graduate our very first infantry battalion back in late 2003, I've got pictures of it somewhere, but they were flying over and looking at all of the areas around the KMTB. And sure enough, this thing looked down into the ground, 5 feet down into the ground, and saw a recent upset. They said, well, there's something metallic down there, and it's a fresh dig. We drive out there, and it took us a little while to even see it. It was so level and flat and buried. Sure enough, we dig it up, and it's one 20 millimeter mortar rounds. It was a cache that they were going to drive up, dig out during the graduation ceremony when BBC and Al Jazeera and Fox News were there, and they were going to mortar us. And it was that OH-58 with that pulsar that could look down into the ground and actually see that. And that's how we caught them. We didn't catch the bad guys. We just took their cache away and then, put up guard. So they're really super cool. Now, when, you do this, like our allies were so impressed, and particularly the Iraqis, they're like, oh my God, how will the bad guys ever defeat America? And I'm like, well, they won't, but they had a simple solution. They stopped putting the cache out in the middle of nowhere. They started putting it in population centers, and they started operating in population centers. Want to know why? Because the pulsar was pretty useless then.
And also understanding that this technology exists opens up for the potential for a cheap way for soldiers to counter this. One description I heard was that you could use aluminized foil wrap or whatever, and you could place it in areas. I'm assuming they mean by as a distraction. Basically, it messes up, like it basically sticks out like a store thumb and can, put basically as a decoy. You can use it as a decoy. I don't know if there's any other methods that you guys know of that are a good way to counter those, but that's one method. So maybe you would put decoys of, illuminized, sheets somewhere to mask your own area or distract them to somewhere else. I don't know.
Hey Doc, I got another example of the enemy kind of defeating our advanced technology. We had in Iraq, we had counter battery radar. Imagine a blanket, for those of you who don't understand. Imagine a blanket, overhead, and then it measures when the mortar round or rocket, goes through one end of the blanket, hits max ordnance, and then comes back down. And it's able to calculate where that came from, and then in turn, those grid coordinates are delivered to our mortars or our artillery, and we're able to then hit that location where it originated from. Well, I remember seeing, and this is 2004, a captured insurgent propaganda film, and they literally left a tripod and camera out there, and they filmed themselves drop 2 or 3 rounds, and then they jumped in their Toyota and they took off, and they left the camera out there, and they counted how long it took until our counter battery response came in. And I don't remember what the time was, but there was a significant amount of time, and it was just enough time to for the enemy to drop their rounds and then pack up, get out of there, and then come back later to get their camera. So it was a propaganda film to show fellow insurgents like, hey, yeah, the Americans have this capability. They can absolutely figure out where we fired these mortars from. However, you have X amount of time to get out there, set up your mortar, drop your rounds, and then pack up and get out of there, get out of Dodge before the timer runs out. So, we have all these multi-million-dollar solutions, and the enemy does, well, we just shoot our rounds faster and get out of there before they hit.
Yeah, so that's just it. The axiom with military is that technology is always a temporary advantage. They will find ways to mitigate it. They'll build their own, or they'll reverse engineers yours. So it's always a temporary advantage. Keep that in mind. And I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying we shouldn't pursue it. I'm just saying realize that there will be ways of mitigating it. And how we finally got the Iraqis to stop shooting those mortars? You're right. We used our counter battery fires to hone in on their sex robots, and we blew those up. And that's when the Iraqis said, no, not our sex robots. I'm sorry, I had to bring it back.
Oh, yeah.
It comes full circle.
Blow those robots up.
You guys jump in there, man. You guys been quiet.
Hey, it's been a good conversation. The point I think we've made throughout the evening, though, is that there's always going to be a role for the infantry. In the time of the revolution, the infantryman stood shoulder to shoulder with his best buddy. And in the case of the American militiaman, he was only required to get 2 shots off before he ran away. Now today, the modern infantryman compared to then is completely different. I think if you went back to the Marines in 1776 and said, oh, yeah, you're going to go set up patrol bases, you're going to conduct deep reconnaissance missions, and Samuel Nichols would have looked at you like he had 14 heads. And I'm sure 200 years from now, those Marines are going to look at us going, yeah, no. But there'll always be infantry because you'll always need somebody to occupy the territory you've just conquered.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Because when you really think about it, like, the way the American militia or the American insurgency, the original insurgency operated is much different than the way the Army or, like the Continental Army probably even operated. So, I'm thinking based off all these technologies that are emerging, I don't think that you're really going to see that same kind of structure. The structure almost makes it difficult to be dynamic and responsive, as responsive as you might need to be. So, when I really think that we're, in a way, if you read the doctrines and the handbooks of the U.S. Army, I kind of feel like we're almost copying the British as far as how they operated in relation to how they were dealing with the militia. so to speak, when we were on, I'm trying to say, so we've almost adopted their formalness in our own, spin on things. But yeah, I feel like we've kind of, that's going to have to reshift in order to deal with some emerging threats that are more dynamic and on the fly, and there's not as much fixed positions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of always the case, Gabe. We're always, when we're talking about big military, is always behind the curve on whatever conflict we come into. You can think about any war that we really fought. It always seems like when we first got involved, we weren't quite prepared for it, and we had to adjust for it. And fortunately, I mean, for most of those, the war lasted long enough that we were able to do that. Maybe that's true for other countries too. It just seems like for the United States, I think whenever we try to envision what our next war is going to look like, we usually seem to get it wrong. And that enemy that we sort of really prepared for was not the one that ended up materializing. And we have to adjust to that. And I'll just say this in terms of this new technology that we have. I'm really not impressed with infantry scale technology since World War II. I just don't think it's progressed much. I think you could take a really, really well-trained group of combat veterans from World War II and put them up against a modern U.S. military unit with what that infantry unit has in terms of equipment and firearms that don't have combat experience, and my money would be on that 75-year-old military group with combat experience. I guess my point is that the experience of the individual and his ability to kill and to deal with the hardships of combat and losing his fellow soldiers is way more valuable than the technology that you get that you can carry on an individual person. If that makes any sense, whether it's night vision or it's sometimes laser devices or the latest and greatest that HK has versus what they were building in 1934. The technology just hasn't impressed me to the point. That's probably, I wouldn't say that for aircraft. Obviously, anything satellite related, that's all brand new. But for the infantry soldier, you can just compare the loadout that they had 75 years ago from any modern country with what they have today. It would not look that unfamiliar to guys from 75 years ago. That's my 2 cents on it. So I don't put, I don't know. I mean, maybe I could be wrong, and tomorrow we could find out that there's some newfangled technology out there that changes everything that we've ever known. But in the 40-something years I've been around and looking back to, we'll say, World War II, that's certainly not been the case.
Wow. Can I jump in there? Because that's a really valid point, and it's one that I've thought about many times. Look, if we take a fighter pilot from World War II and we put him in into modern day, and we showed him, an F-22, he wouldn't understand the technology at all. It would take a long time to say, okay, look, we got to bring you up to speed, bud. There's this thing called jet propulsion. And then we'd have to show him all the technology advances over the last 75 years, and he would be befuddled. But eventually, I mean, obviously he's human, he can be trained. But the point is, here's what we wouldn't have to do. This is really interesting. I wouldn't have to say to that fighter pilot from World War II, by the way, a fighter pilot's role is to shoot down other aircraft, other bombers and fighter planes, and once in a while to strafe the ground and blow up a tank or shoot at infantry on the ground. The World War II pilot would go, duh. That's what I do in my P-51 Mustang or my P-47, Thunderbolt. That's what I do. And you were like, oh, yeah, right. So what I'm trying to point out and back up what Bruce is saying is, though the technologies have just advanced to the point where it looks space age and alien to this fighter pilot, the job is the same. Now, let's grab that infantryman from World War II. We're going to pull him 75 years into the future, and I'm going to say, all right, here's all your gear. And he's like, oh, that's a fancy sight. Oh, look what you did to the grenade. Huh? That's a neat way to shoot a rocket. He's going to know everything I show him. Now, I'm going to show him some optics that he hasn't seen. He's going to be like, wow, this is substantially better than the optics I got to use. But he'll know all of it. And he'll learn it in about 18 minutes. Okay? And then I'm going to say, he's going to like, well, so what we do is we stand here in trenches and make sure we blow up the tanks while the artillery shoot at us. And I'm like, oh, that's the peer-to-peer fight. Sure. But realize we have nation building. What? You have what? We have nation building, and we have police action, and we also have counterinsurgency and insurgency. And his mind's going to be blown. Like, well, hold on, stop. You can teach me your technology in 18 minutes. I'm going to go back to school for 6 months to learn what the hell you just said. Because the infantryman's job has so vastly expanded in the last 75 years, even though the technology has stayed essentially the same. And so when you ask me, are infantry relevant, and particularly if I'm answering today and not 5,000 years from now, my answer is, you bet they're relevant. And here's one reason. And one of our commenters just said that. I didn't know if you caught. Oh, yeah, Brent, you put it up. And what he said was, yeah, when our radar and the enemy shoots, their technology, and then we, because of political, situations, and we're nation building, and we couldn't shoot because they would put their, the enemy would put their mortars next to a school or a mosque, and we'd say, oh no, we can't shoot. Well, then what we would do is we'd go out and we'd say, yo, infantrymen, our technology doesn't work as well as we wanted it to. You infantry, there's a mosque over there, go set up an ambush. And oh, by the way, there's a school over there, go set up an ambush. So who do you call when your high-speed technology fails you? Yeah, you call the infantrymen, because they're your Swiss Army knife. They can do everything.
Awesome. So we're just a little over 10 minutes for hitting our 2-hour mark, and I think we should start wrapping up a conclusion here, because somehow we just turned this whole thing back thanks to Doc.
No, it's me, bro.
Comment.
That's my
topic.
Hey, but going back to what Bruce said, to piggyback off what he said, you have to remember, the infantryman really hasn't had the same level of investment as the Air Force. I think once the Air Force got created, you really started to see, a lot of that money get siphoned over to them, because they kind of got a lot of the credit for winning World War II with the nukes, with bombing Hiroshima and stuff, and then the further threat of the Reds getting the nuke and this and that. So they've been focusing mainly on, I think a lot of the fighter pilots have been getting most of that Gucci gear. I would say that there is a possibility that some of that stuff is a game changer in the next iteration of things coming out recently. So like, if I show you right here, in this sense, we have these coming out, being fielded already, and no, that's not getters. But the point is, this right here is going to have augmented reality plugged in, so they're going to actually have like a video game where basically the target, you can see through walls. You're going to have your heads-up display, the name of, or like a compass, basically a GPS. You're going to have west, left, west, north, south displayed right away. The names of all your men above their heads. So I would say that some of these things, and then another thing you might see, like in these games, right, where you have the technology to, what is this? If I can find a clip of it, right here.
So I look at this stuff, Gabe. I look at this stuff, and I'm just like, my neck's hurting just from looking at a picture of it. Like,
yeah, you got to up your neck game.
And I don't know if any of that crap in that head-up display is going to work when a Chinese hypersonic missile takes out the satellite that's feeding it.
Well, yeah, hopefully that would be fed at a local level. In fact, they're actually trying to get GPS so that it doesn't rely on satellites at all. But the whole point is, I think once you get some of those, Bruce, you're probably going to start seeing some game changing. Because like if you knew exactly where the waypoint was just by looking at it, and you knew where the enemy is without having to, look at them visually with your own thermal, you just see it, with echolocation kind of. You could see the point where it's going to get predator level stuff where you're just running circles around them and shooting into the bush, and you're actually hitting them without even knowing that visually they're there, from your own eyes.
It seems nice to have. It doesn't seem game changing to me.
Well,
an enemy with a light machine gun, AK is just as effective at delivering that fire as the guy wearing that freaking head-up display helmet. So, in any event, so yeah, we're 10 mics out from 2 hour mark. So let's start orienting towards a conclusion here. I just want to talk on a comment that was posted about females in the infantry, and this is we've already talked about it. We've already had a live stream about this. My opinion, no, absolutely not. But unfortunately, that's the political climate, and people are geared towards a Hollywood mentality, like Starship Troopers, where men and women are showering together, and they're just going to be one big happy cohesive unit, and none of the mental or physical attractions of 18, 19-year-olds straight out of high school are going to take place, and everybody's going to be hunky-dory, and women are just as physically capable as men, and all these are non-issues to the people that have created these decisions. So we just have to live with the atmosphere that they've created. I will say this though, how long has it been since they integrated, Doc? Do you know? It's been
2015.
2015. Now I'm in the reserves. I'm not active duty. I've been in the reserves since 2006. When I left active duty, I went straight into reserves. So if they started bringing females into the fold in 2015, I have yet to see a female infantryman in the reserves. Now, with that being said, I have seen female AAV crewmen, and I think some other now integrated MOSs, but I have not seen a female grunt on the reserve side yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, the numbers that they were throwing out at the 5-year mark. So in the Army integrated in 2015, and at 2005, what they said was, I want to say they expected something like 12%. So they were expecting something like 6,500. I think that's the number. And if not, it's a ballpark. They were saying, okay, we should have 6,500 female enlisted NCO and officers in the infantry. This is what our 5-year goal was. And they said, okay, how many are in? I'm not joking, 6,500. And they counted 62, not 6,200, not 620. There were 62. And then it was so disappointingly small that they said, okay, but there are 62 women enlisted NCO and officers serving in line units. And it turned out something like 18 were serving in line units. Everybody else had gotten some kind of TDY. Okay, so they were not in line units. They were serving in a comm section or range control or something like this, where they just went, get me the hell out of here. And it was unbelievable. They could get right down to the name. Like they literally said, we can tell you the names of who's working in the line. And I think 18 people in 5 years, 18 females in 5 years were working in line units out of something like 70,000 United States Army infantrymen.
Yeah,
and I'm not surprised. We talked about this in one of the previous streams when we talked about the types of careers that females typically prefer to do or are attracted to. They don't typically do dangerous jobs. Take the military out. They're not crane operators. They're not out working in mines. They're not doing anything that's inherently dangerous where they can get their knees smashed and their heads cracked open. There are a few exceptions, and those women are they're tough gals, absolutely. But for the most part, they don't choose to go into those types of professions. I don't have any idea why the ratio would be any different when they're going into the Marines or into the military, unless they just, there'll be a few that want to test themselves. But I think when they're on the front lines doing what frontline soldiers do, they'll wish they were somewhere else fairly quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't really buy that some of them can, though. All right. Just give one of so many examples we can give and studies and data points and all this. So this week, if you've been watching for the last like 3 to 4 days in Australia, there's something called netball. Never heard of this before in my life. Okay. But it looks something like soccer and something like basketball, but it's kind of a weird. But anyway, apparently netball, it's a team-based sport. It's a legit sport. I just never heard of it before. And it requires physical prowess, physical athletic power and speed and teamwork and all this other stuff. So it's a female sport. And they wanted to say, look, this isn't just a female sport. We're going to open this up to males. So they stood up a single first ever, supposedly, male netball. This is all under 18, by the way. So it's what we would call high school. It's just not associated with the school. But nonetheless, one male team absolutely dominated Australia's netball. I mean, they played every team, female team in the country, apparently, that could do this. And they just crushed them. How bad was it? Apparently, I don't want to get my facts wrong because it's not like I watched this sport or knew about it, but apparently on the final game, so this boys team is competing against the leading national female team. The boys team won by more than 30 points. And I don't know what's normal here, but apparently that was not normal. They said the parents were standing on the sidelines on video during this national televised event, just screaming profanities at the male teams. So they not only won, and won so incredibly decisively and took all the ribbons and banners and awards and trophies, but they did it under duress while just being brutalized verbally by the crowds and the families of these girls. So yeah. you can tell me, there's some girls who can.
Maybe we can have some biological males that self-identify as females step in and skew those numbers a little bit.
Hey, I gotta make this point real quick because if you guys remember the coach that I had on when we were talking about the transgender athlete, so he's in here and he's watching. He's retired first sergeant Marine Corps and
good guy.
I was telling him a story because after he was actually the company first sergeant of this infantry rifle company that I was first rifle company that I was company first sergeant at, and I told him after he left. The reserves is a little different than active duty. So in the reserves, a young Marine could go in and say, hey, I want to be a machine gunner. And if they have that spot open for him, he's going to go to the School of Infantry and he's going to end up getting that 0331 machine gunner MOS, as opposed to an active duty person goes in. He just knows that he's going to be an 03. He's going to be a grunt. And he's not going to know exactly what type of grunt job he's going to have until he goes to School of Infantry. The Marine Corps demands of the Marine Corps picks. So anyways, I was telling him I had this female Marine. This is kind of when they first integrated. I had this female that was going to recruit training, and she was slated to be a mortarman. And, people think mortarmen is this lackadaisical job because they sit in the rear and play spades. You're not taking into consideration the freaking
hump that mortar.
You're humping the mortar. You're humping the rounds. And
don't want that.
But I told him, I was like, "Hey, man, I got a female Marine. It's gonna be the very first one in our company, slated to be a mortarman." Well, she didn't make it through SOI, so she ended up becoming an admin clerk. And so again, so he was asking. He's blowing up my phone. He's like, "Well, what about your female mortarman?" And she didn't make it. She didn't make it through SOI because part of SOI is you got to complete this mortar hike. So, in any event, we should probably start wrapping up. I'm going to shut my mouth and I'm going to turn it over to Les. How about that? Les, let's get some closing comments and start closing this out.
All right. Well, despite what all the technology may say, the day of the infantryman is long not going to be over. The infantrymen are going to be around for as long as there's warfare, basically. And as far as what I got going on the hook right now, if y'all tune into my channel, I've got my coverage up of the Finnish brutality match, one of the most coolest shooting matches I've ever been to. And after that, I'll be putting up some coverage of the One Shepherd 40th anniversary. So stay tuned. Bruce?
Looking forward to both of those, Les. And I'll say, I agree with you. If you're some young cat out there thinking about joining the infantry, don't worry. There will be a job for you, and you'll be able to retire there. I have no doubt about it. You can take it to the bank. The infantry is not going anywhere. It's not being replaced by technology. You may get supplemented by technology, but I just believe there for a long, long time in the future, there will be a role for those who put boots on the ground and go kick indoors.
I'm going to say the same thing. I mean, I started this off by admitting that I'd play devil's advocate this evening. And so I tried to suggest where technologies might offset the need for human infantry, but certainly won't offset the need for the mission of the infantry. And since those technologies are nowhere near our horizon, the answer is that your job in the infantry is remarkably safe. If anything, its greatest threat is been its own success. And that is that, again, when anything else breaks in the military, it's the infantry who've got to solve the problem. So, moving forward, look for infantry to continue to be the jack of all trades and the queen of battle.
All right. So I would just say that the infantry definitely, you definitely need to control the ground, and you need to have that infantry to be able to control the ground on everything. There's going to be a lot of technologies that are going to be probably much more deadly to infantry coming in. But I think in general, as long as the infantry adapts and finds this, as long as there's solutions that are for the infantry will still be there. I don't think they're ever going to be left to the wayside. But yeah, I mean, in general, you could definitely do some work as long as you adapt to the situation at hand. Like I said, one idea, having a bunch of Marines on an island with a whole bunch of personal solar launched missiles is going to be very effective for dealing with, an invading army. It's going to be very difficult to track all that down. So if anything, the technology is probably going to bolster infantry and make it so that now not just one rifleman can take out an entire squad, whereas before they were doing this with their freaking muskets or doing this with their bolt action rifles. Eventually you're going to have an infantry with the freaking nuke launcher, and that's probably where it's going to start turning the tide. Is you got 1,000 Marines with nuke launchers and Stinger missiles that can track stealth planes. Yeah, you're good luck getting rid of that island. You basically have to nuke the whole island to get rid of that problem. So that's what I think that they need to go into as far as direction.
I guess I'm the last one. I concur with the other gentleman. Hey, grunts ain't going anywhere. If anything, we're becoming more lethal. And until it's 2,000 years in the future, like Doc was pointing out with sex robots, we freaking grunts are here to stay. And I know as far as the Marine Corps is concerned, we're trying to make our individual riflemen, our individual infantrymen more lethal by combining all of our infantry MOSs into essentially super grunts. I'm still up in the air whether I agree with that yet, but I'm open-minded. I think the Chinese fight is coming. I think it's coming sooner than later. Hopefully I'm wrong. I don't want my son to fight this fight. So I hope if it happens while I'm still in, because I want to fucking go and I don't want my kid to go. So that's where I stand with that. I think we beat a dead horse. So those are my comments on the topic here. It was a great discussion. I think we have a lot of different minds here. We got Gabe, that is our technology nut. That's why I brought him in. I thought he'd be a good fit for this conversation. So my final thing that I want to put out there is, man, I've been working in this damn alert video with Bruce for days.
Y'all don't know. Brent's working on an alert video. Okay, so pay attention. He's working on an alert video.
My eyes are bloodshot from the lack of sleep. So I'm telling you, I know you guys are like, I'm sick of hearing me talk about this thing, but it is so tedious. I'm trying to put all these little pictures in. It's all filmed, guys. I'm just, dropping little pictures in to back up all the points that Bruce and I make. So it's coming, guys. It's coming very, very soon. Like in the next day or two, it will be released. So
hey, when's the STX coming?
STX.
Oh, yes. Okay. No, he's talking about my review video. I haven't. Yes, that's after the alert video. So I know this sounds crazy, guys. I had to put the One Shepherd stuff on pause because, frankly, I was just getting burned out working on it. So, because I did, the initial events and some other stuff leading up to the semester, and I was just getting burnt out. So I had to put it on hold and do this alert video so that I could get re-energized and finish up with the STX and FTX video.
Okay, so let me say that the registration opens up in early January, and I'm not joking. This is really going to work out well then, because that means your Sticks, STX video and the FTX simulation. If that's hitting Christmas, New Year's, even after, that's perfect, Brent. And you're right. You need to get this alert video out, because I've been hearing for it so long that I'm afraid my sex robots are going to be the one that actually deliver it. So we can't wait that long.
I got my old lady peeking at it. She's telling me time to wrap it up.
It is.
Well, by all means, then.
Last thing. It's November 1st. You guys know what that means?
No Shave November.
Negative.
That's right, baby.
It is 9 days until the Marine Corps' birthday. This is a big freaking deal. This is a very big deal. I just dropped off my dress blues at the cleaners. That means Marine Corps ball is coming up. So I will be very intoxicated celebrating the Marine Corps' birthday very, very shortly. Unless, I hope you're going to be right there with me, bud.
Hoorah, brother.
I'm right. So, all right, guys. Thanks for watching. We definitely had a good stream. So, appreciate you guys tuning in. Have a good night.